Welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast for small business owners who want to leave social media without losing all their clients.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put your phone away. Yeah. Let's go off the grid.
Hi friends, Amelia here. Welcome to Off the Grid and happy December. I cannot believe, but I'm also very happy that we have reached the end of 2025. There are a few weeks left, and while other creative marketing, artist, business podcasts out there might be encouraging you to hustle to the finish line, that is not my approach. I don't know about you, but I am tired, and all I really have energy for is curling up on the couch with a blanket, writing in my journal, drinking hot tea, and having really reflective, deep conversations with the people that I care about, the people that I make sense of the world with, and the people who feel like candlelight in a dark, dark room. And so, knowing that about myself and guessing that there are many of you out there who might feel similarly, that is exactly what I've decided to bring us here today on the podcast. In this episode, I am sharing a conversation that I had with my friend and colleague, Shivani Mehta Bhatia, about how to hold it all. This was really us coming together to have a conversation about what work has looked like in 2025 and how we've kept at it or not through the grief and rage and despair and hope of this year. It's an honest conversation. It's a beautiful conversation. And if you listen to this conversation and you wish that you had a space to reflect on the year, to process some of the challenging times, to find the glimmers of hope and light amidst it all, and you wish you could do that with others, then I would love to invite you to a free end-of-year journaling session that I'm hosting in just a few days as this comes out. It's going to be Tuesday, December 9th at 12 p.m. Central Time. And we'll gather for an hour to reflect, to share, to probably laugh and cry and light candles and pull some cards and do all of the things that help us feel less alone at the end of a long year. If you'd like to join me, you can find the link in the show notes to RSVP. It is totally free. I will not be sending a recording because I want the room to really respect the tenderness of our intentions. But if you sign up and you can't attend live, I will send out the prompts that we work through together. So head to the show notes, RSVP for this free end of year call. And while you're doing that, I want to tell you a little bit more about Shivani. Shivani Mehta Bhatia is a conflict midwife, equity advisor, and systems strategist. She's the founder of Tulsi Strategies, a transition design consultancy that supports justice-rooted leaders and social sector organizations as they navigate power, repair, and complex change. Her work sits at the intersection of relational skills and systems change, helping teams build the capacity and structures that make new worlds possible. She is also the author of Intimate Practice, a weekly newsletter about the human side of systems change, which you can find linked in the show notes. It is always a pleasure and an honor to be in conversation with Shivani, and I think this is the perfect way to end our 7th season of the show. Things will be quiet here on this feed for the next few weeks, but if you want more, there will be 2 more exclusive interviews that I'm sharing in the Clubhouse over the next 2 weeks. One with Ashley Neese about her journey through the LA wellness scene and how leaving social media actually helped her heal. And then a conversation with Amanda Laird, where we look back at the marketing trends that we predicted at the start of 2025 and see how they went and how things unfolded throughout the year. So those 2 episodes will be exclusively for members of the Off the Grid Clubhouse, which you can find linked in the show notes. You can join for $5 a month or $50 a year, and you get lots of great conversations, bonus episodes, behind the scenes updates from me, as well as very curated tech critical link roundups, visibility opportunities, and more. So this is the last episode of the year on the main feed, but there is still more happening in the Clubhouse if you'd like to join us. And I'm offering that free end of year journaling event on December 9th if you're looking for camaraderie and support as this year comes to a close. Thank you so much for tuning into the show and for supporting me in my book launch this fall, which was such a big endeavor and joyful celebration. Very much thanks to all of you. If you haven't gotten the book yet, it is linked in the show notes. You can still get yourself a copy. It's also now available in retailers all over the world with international shipping for all versions and more. So again, everything is linked in the show notes. Head there to find it all as we dive into this conversation about how to hold it all with Shivani, Mehta, Bhatia. Hi, Shivani. Welcome back to Off the Grid.
Hi, Amelia. I'm so happy to be here.
I am so happy to have you for so many reasons. One, it's been too long since we have looked at each other over the Zoom screen, one-on-one. Way too long. Two, I think about our first conversation for Off the Grid all the time. And I don't think enough people have listened to it, quite frankly. Dear listener, I will link it in the show notes. You should definitely go back through the feed because, gosh, I mean, a year and a half ago?
Has it really been that long already? Wow.
It's been a while.
Yeah, I would believe that, actually. I would believe that. It was such an off-the-cuff kind of conversation, too, and I feel like was such a spark for both of us in our separate and respective and, like, collective worlds in some ways.
Yeah, it was February 2024.
Oh, my God.
That it came out. Yeah, that's wild.
Wow, almost 2 years ago.
Yeah, we had this conversation around the question, is leaving social media a privilege?
Wow.
And it really came from this, what I see as sort of like reactive response some people have when folks leave social media and they say something like, well, you can only do that because you have a big audience, or you can only do that because you're privileged. And you and I, like, you very helpfully helped me and listeners unpack, like, what does privilege really mean? Where is the power here?
Yeah.
And I think that became such a seed for me around thinking about who holds the power in our relationships to tech platforms and companies and apps. And so much of Off the Grid has sprung from that. So thank you.
Of course. I'm so glad to hear that. I think that's sort of like the thing that I honestly most hope for in my work also, is that something that is hard about my work and also something that I love about my work is that a lot of it is like planting little seeds that I don't always get to see the fruits of. And so it's very cool to see the fruits of it in some ways. And also to know that like some of those turning points were so tiny, and also was just, I think of it a lot as like a catalyst where we might just reduce the friction, or we might reduce the time it takes to like have those realizations or to kind of get to that point. But it is by no means an original thought that I kind of brought forward, right? It's so much credit to like your work and how you took that seed and went with it and transformed it and brought it into all of these other different beautiful spaces, like your book and the rest of this podcast. Like, that's glorious.
Yeah, thank you. And even in the episode, you're always citing your sources, and I really appreciate the way that you like position yourself, even just now, like in a lineage, right? It's like, you're like, this is where I learned this from, and this is how I'm staying connected to what's coming from the things that I'm sharing and teaching. And I'm just glad that our relationship gets to be a part of that web. So those are 2 reasons I'm really thrilled to talk to you. But the third reason I'm really happy that we're here is because it has been a really hard year. Understatement of the century. And it's been hard to talk about that on the podcast. Like, I feel like I've been reduced to sort of trite statements like, we all know it's been hard, but we're doing this anyway. Like, I just don't even, it's hard to discuss in a way that both brings like the gravity of the challenges of the year, but also the realities of having to continue working and wanting to continue dreaming. And so when I was holding all of that together, you felt like the exact person I wanted to talk to about it. So I'm just really grateful that you're open to joining me in this conversation.
Oh, I'm so honored. Thank you.
I wanted to open us up, honestly, with just a bit of sharing. And I just wanted to ask you, like, as 2025 comes to a close, how are you feeling? And what are you really holding right now at the end of this hard year?
Yeah. I mean, I think I feel very similarly in that it feels like impossible to describe in some ways. Like, I think I've also, even though I kind of have this practice of returning to how do we describe it and what is the language that we use and how much imperfection can we allow ourselves in that language, I still have the initial reaction of like, oh, I want to package it up and I want to make it, I want to like give you the story of this year. And I don't know what the story of this year is. Something that I share pretty often with folks is like this sense of living through polycrisis, in that there is global and domestic and sort of contextual polycrisis as like a backdrop to everything that we're doing. And even when I am not really intimately involved in those polycrises in a way that I either want to be or don't want to be, that is sort of this constant backdrop for whatever else is happening. And whatever else is happening, like, my life is actually really beautiful right now. Like, I actually have had so much joy in this year. And that is like a hard thing also to talk about. And so, yeah, it's both a lot of joy and a lot of grief, and also this like constant sort of global societal backdrop of polycrisis.
Yeah, I feel like something I have also been doing this year that I'm hearing in what you're saying is like treating my life like a sort of geological terms. Like, it's all like sedimentary rock. It's like there are layers. There's like my most intimate personal life. There's like my broader personal life. There's my local communities. There's my statewide level community. Like, for me, it's become this pretty necessary practice of pulling out like how is each layer doing, because they're all very different. And sometimes I'm feeling bad and I look around and I'm like, I can't figure out why. And it's because the bad thing is like 8 layers down, right? Or like I'm feeling good, but I don't think I should be because I know how bad it is 8 layers down. And I think that like using this, mediocre metaphor or whatnot, but like some things can feel really tectonic this year, and I can't quite figure out where they're happening and what's going on because there's so much going on. And I think that words like polycrisis are helpful to name that. And also, I think maybe it's more helpful for us just both to be like, there are not words for this.
Yeah, completely. Polycrisis feels like a very incomplete word, or feels like a very academic word to me in a lot of ways, where like it is the best one that I found for right now. And also it feels very incomplete. I have talked a lot about like complex grief also, and kind of the layers that that brings up. And I think sometimes that feels more appropriate. And also part of complex grief is that there can be a lot of joy in that. And I think a lot of folks that I'm talking to who experience joy also feel a lot of guilt for experiencing that joy, or that like that joy comes at the cost of ignoring things that we maybe shouldn't be ignoring. I feel that all the time. I feel like if I am happy in this moment, is it because I'm ignoring something that should not be ignored? Or if I am devastated in this moment, is it because I'm ignoring some aspect of privilege that actually does keep me protected in some kind of way temporarily or not right now. It's a very, very incomplete thing, and a very like multi-textured thing, I think.
Yeah, this has definitely been a year for me, and I think for many of us, that has brought to light even more many of my privileges, especially seeing the dissonance between what some of I mean, there has long been dissonance globally between people's experiences of the world. That's not
Totally,
a
yeah.
profound statement. That's like a really minimizing statement. Right.
But it happens. I mean, sometimes those basic things are things we actually need reminders of, though, too. Like, I think that's a valid thing to remind us of.
And I think it's felt even closer to home this year. And it's not that I'm having to be online witnessing what's happening from afar. It's like, oh no, this is happening in Chicago. This is happening in Portland. Some things for me, like this is happening on my block this year.
Yeah.
And holding that is hard. Like dealing with the things that are coming right to your door is hard. And then also being like, but on my internet life, I'm launching a book. I'm making money. I'm living the fantasy. Like that too has been so wild to me. Like it truly feels like when I'm in my home office, I am in a different world than when I leave the door.
Yeah.
And for me, as like sort of a newfound scholar of attention, I don't know if I'm tied to that self-definition yet, but we'll see. Maybe it'll go in my bio. I've been thinking a lot as well about how I think that like multi-layeredness of our lives, I think that clear dissonance between like what we're being asked to do to keep working and what we're being asked to witness around the world and very close to home, it's like causing, I think, a lot of harm to our attention. Our capacity is lower than I've seen it for so many people, even during COVID or other, quote unquote, unprecedented things that we've lived through together. And I'm feeling it in myself, just how hard it is to be switching those gears between like quite literally like, oh, I'm launching my book. And then I'm like going outside to try to figure out like what my neighbor with dementia has set on fire in front of his house today. Like that's like where my life has been a lot this year. And then I'm like looking at the news to be like, I got to witness what's going on in Gaza or elsewhere. And those are just a few of the things that I'm holding, as we come to this conversation about how to hold it all.
I feel very similarly in like the scale of what I can pay attention to at any given time feels very fractured. My screen time is through the roof and has been for pretty much this entire year. Like,
yeah, same. I had like 17 hours of screen time the other day between my computer, my iPad, and my phone. That's literally every hour I was awake.
Right. And I have also sort of run into questions for myself around where is the line between witnessing and consuming, and where have I let that line blur when I'm somebody who's had a very strong practice around witnessing for a very long time, and when actually I think this year, sort of more than any year, has gotten me to the point of like, when is witnessing not enough and like really insufficient actually, and how do I sometimes even use witnessing as something to avoid taking action when I've, have been teaching about witnessing and holding kind of a witnessing practice as like a really solid strategy to cope with the polycrisis or to work through the polycrisis, or even something that I've considered my role in showing up to the work that I feel like I'm meant to do or supposed to do or trying to practice. I reference Deepa Iyer's social change ecosystem framework a lot, and I have for years. And like that is sort of the first one that I was like, oh, there's a practice of witnessing in this. Like that is my role. I can sort of settle into that, and that has felt less and less comfortable for me over the last, several years. It's not just like this year in particular, but I think this year has sort of brought that forward for me in a really big way.
Yeah, I think that we're seeing more than ever the way that like witnessing can be co-opted into like a content strategy.
Oh my God, yes.
Which is so gross and has been happening for a long time. I mean, I think of, even like Susan Sontag's writing on war photography and things like that. Like, it's not like this is brand new, but it feels like it has like peaked in a new way, especially as we've seen these crises that are years long. And that something I have struggled with is like sustaining the witnessing. Like, what does it mean to do that over years? And what does it mean to do that in a like media ecosystem that is so saturated and so constant? And like, can witnessing be a constant act? And like, what does that do to my body and my nervous system?
I think something that's really hard and tricky and sort of messy about the whole thing is that there's like just no perfect way of showing up to any of this. Like I talk about this a lot in my more like power sort of related work, but or like I will teach this pretty often is like I think we've positioned privilege and oppression as sort of this binary. Like either you're privileged or you're oppressed, and there's no way to be both. And if you have one, then you should feel constantly guilty or constantly traumatized. And that's kind of the only option that you have available to you. And I think that's just so incomplete. I think it's so incomplete and it's so flattening to the actual human experience of like showing up in a world and like an actual relational experience of like trying to navigate any one of those dimensions at any given time. I think the reality is that we like most of us, if not all of us, I don't want to say literally every single person in the world, but I think the vast majority of us have some dimension of privilege and some dimension of oppression. And we are living both simultaneously on these really different tectonic planes all the time. And so, yeah, we're going to like pick and choose what makes sense to us. What do all of those experiences teach us about how we should be showing up or how we can show up or how we want to show up or how we're really afraid to show up. And also like when we kind of just have to hide under the covers for a little while. And like maybe that's okay also.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciated what you said about like there's no perfect way to show up. And I kind of want to take that even farther because I think what I've been discovering this year is like when we are grappling with polycrisis, when we are dealing on so many levels of our lives with things that are frankly like unacceptable and unimaginable, there's not even a sufficient way to show up. There's actually no quote unquote good enough way to show up to this. And so that has been a challenge to sit with this year. But I will be honest, it has also been a little bit freeing because it popped me out of like trying to even do the good enough job. And now I'm just trying to fucking do anything.
Yeah, I'm trying to do a bad job sometimes, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's something that has like broken that I cannot unbreak. And I'm just like now like working in the wreckage of it. And that's actually kind of okay. I think that I used to like labor under the illusion that I could do it right. And now I'm like, oh no, that's not even really a thing. Like this thing should not be happening at all. There's no right way for me to respond to it. And I can still arrive with self-reflection and self-responsibility and self-sovereignty and community accountability. And like, it doesn't give me permission to just like cause harm and all of this. I'm not saying that, but like, to this people I think we're speaking to, it's that sort of like, it's not only is there not the perfect way to show up, but there's no like quote unquote good enough way to do it. Good or bad, perfect or imperfect, those aren't even the spectrums or the stakes anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think even this like the question of enoughness, like it's not like even just what could possibly be enough. Like if we're up in a fight against billionaire oligarchs at this point who have infinitely more power than we do. We are like operating under a completely fractured democracy at this point, right? Like kind of a farcical version of it in a lot of ways. So the entire premise has changed, and the concept of enoughness, I think, is one that we have to like pretty fundamentally reevaluate, and is not possible. Like I in my body cannot do any one thing that will save any of that, or that will fix any of that. Something that I also do a lot with in conflict work specifically, but a lot of like if I'm, mediating a conflict, part of what I will ask people is like, what can we not repair actually? Can we actually name the things that we can't repair? And I think to your point about like, I can't fix this, sometimes we can't fix it. And sometimes that is an impossible grief to be confronted with. And I actually think it's a really valuable grief to walk through in ourselves and with our people of like, there are pieces of this that we cannot fix. There are aspects to either what's, in the neighborhood and the person setting fire to something in their yard, or there's like, I live in a neighborhood that has a lot of police presence. There's aspects of that I cannot do anything about. And also, if I am pouring my energy and attention constantly into the things that I can't do anything about, I will never do anything. And if I also ignore the things that I can't do anything about, I will be paralyzed with grief.
Yeah, it's such a like beautiful human frailty to believe that we can change anything and everything,
Yeah.
right? That like we do have all the power, but we absolutely do not have all the power. That's like it's just very like Icarus of us. Like
Exactly.
I really appreciate the way that we've sort of circled and spiraled through this already around just like how this year has been hard. And also, we've both experienced plenty of joy alongside the grief. I always think that like as grief heightens, joy heightens. And something I really appreciated that you wrote earlier this year was a piece on the 9 rules of generative conflict. And in that piece, you talk about being in firefighter mode versus being in gardener mode as like responses to conflict, but I also think they're just responses to like the world at large right now. And you ask this really beautiful question that I want to ask you now. I think you kind of pose it a little bit rhetorically, but I'm like, let's dig in together.
Sounds good.
And the question in your words is, how do we focus on the vision, the work and the dream, the world building, the promise of moral justice when we've been in firefighter mode? So could you talk a little bit about like what is firefighter mode? Why do we go there when things are hard? And then how do we start to like turn perhaps towards something else? Or if we should, or should we be in firefighter mode, I guess?
Yeah. I think where it really started for me was, or where it kind of peaked for me in some ways was in 2020, late 2020 and early 2021. My background's in public health. So I was actually working on the pandemic response for a state government public health agency at the time. And my job was to essentially create a health equity strategy 6 months into the pandemic response, which was not really a time to be trying to do that. And so I was pretty actively confronted with this question of like, we are in firefighter mode. There is an active pandemic raging. And I had to both kind of hold this question very literally of like, who do we vaccinate first? And also, how do we make sure that with this thing that is happening that is we know is a mass disabling event, like how do we build up a kind of like a form of government or a form of structural support that is actually grounded in disability justice and like the peak version or the ideal version of what this could be with the very literal constraints of putting out fires.
Yeah, you're like, we're walking into a burning building that is public health during a pandemic.
So I've for the last several years sort of had to be in a place of doing both or being able to walk between both. And I think part of what I've found is one is we can't actually be creative when the house is on fire. Like when the house is on fire, you got to put the house out. Like that has to come first. And I think to our point about like, who are we as any one individual person to be able to hold it? I think part of the collective thing is, okay, if you are putting out the fire right now, can I be holding on to, hey, we actually do really have to think about disability justice in this moment, right? If one of us can be kind of holding the immediacy of it or working on the immediacy of it, can I trust that that is in progress enough that we don't get kind of drowned in that altogether? Because I also think, I think to kind of bring it back from 2020, 2021 into this year, part of what has felt so debilitating about this year is like, we don't have hope in this kind of domestic global way that I think we used to for a really long time. Like, I feel like I have seen so much discourse this year, even like, this is a silly example, but like poking fun of the like alt indie music from to like the, happens to, what is it? The stomp and holler kind of music.
Yeah, everybody's like making fun of the Lumineers, Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros. I love both of those bands.
Same. I was, very much in it in that moment. And I feel like I've seen so much of that of like, we were coming out of the 2008 election in that time. And there, like, we genuinely did have this sense of like, yes, we can in those years. And I think that is a thing that's so dramatically changed. And it's very hard to hold on to a vision when we don't have a thing to be hopeful for, or when we are so disillusioned that there's this sort of collective sense of like, but it's never going to get better, right? It's so easy to slip into nihilism. It's so easy to slip into that kind of despair. Something that my therapist has given me, which I absolutely love, is this definition that despair is just the corpse of hope. And I think if we start to slip into despair, it's because we've killed off hope. And I actually think that we like have to have hope in order to have a reason to put out the fire. Otherwise, why would you put out the fire? Why not let it burn?
Where are you accessing hope in your life right now?
I actually think that I'm accessing hope through conflict work right now. Like, I kind of came to conflict work really accidentally. I started in really big systems change kind of work, and I sort of backed my way into conflict work by accident. But because we couldn't focus on this, and what I found in conflict work is people really only engage with conflicts when they want something to be different and when they are like desperate and hopeful and like willing to kind of be super vulnerable, super intimate, and kind of put everything on the line to sustain a relationship and to deepen a relationship. That to me is like profoundly tender and profoundly hopeful work. And it kind of takes my breath away every single time, honestly, when I like get to be sort of in that space with people. Yeah, I don't get called in when we've turned to despair. I get called in when there's hope and when there's actually a chance to move it forward. And that is profoundly transformative. And it feels very human. It feels sort of like the stuff of what makes us us in a lot of ways. Yeah, it makes me very hopeful.
I think that's a really beautiful answer. And like conflict clarifies commitments. Because if I'm not committed to a relationship, I just walk away from the I don't, quote unquote, do the conflict with them. And I just recorded a conversation that listeners will hear next year with Morgan Evans of Business Casual about feedback. And we talked a lot about how feedback is often just like a micro instance of conflict, or it's like a way of mediating an instance of conflict or a tool for navigating larger scale conflict, but it can be both. And that conversation left me feeling very hopeful. And it clarified for me, like, oh, the relationships where I'm unwilling to give any feedback or receive feedback, it's like, because I'm not committed to them. And this is interesting in the context of business, because when things are very transactional, they're not intimate, they're not personal, they're not hopeful in any of these ways. And I think that thinking about hope actually asks me to question, like, what are my commitments? What am I committed to?
Yeah. I mean, you wrote about it in your book. You wrote this in the very first introduction, the piece of this of like attention as attending to, which is tending to. And to me that like if I am showing up with a concern or a hurt or an ask or a piece of feedback or a bid for attention, I am asking to be tended to. I'm asking somebody else to let me tend to them also. That's profoundly intimate. It's profoundly human. It's profoundly hopeful. It's very vulnerable. And we don't do it when we're done, or we don't do it when something is calcified, or we don't do it when we aren't interested, or when we're despairing, when we're also done.
Yeah, and that's because attention is about an openness and tenderness is about an openness. And I love that we're situating like hope in conflict work, because I think that, well, when I think about where I'm like locating or finding hope in my life right now, it's not necessarily in like the happiest or shiniest or most pretty places. Like, it's not like, I felt so much joy going through my book launch, but that's not really where I'm finding like hope. When I think about it, like it's in these really tender, intimate spaces. And honestly, for me, that's been like, with my partner who's been like grieving the loss of father this year, and we're like really in it together, or like with my beloved dog who's 16, and like we're just very much slowing down toward the end of her life. And like those are the tenderest places in my life, the most intimate ones. And the ones I'm most committed to.
Yeah.
And as a result, they're the ones where I'm most hopeful. And I don't know that I would have pieced all that together until you brought conflict into the hope conversation.
Yeah. I like to say it came from birth, sex, and death work. So that's really,
The trifecta.
yeah, it is. It really is the trifecta. And like I was a birth and abortion doula. I was a crisis hotline counselor. I was a sex educator for a while. And then I did a lot of death work. And they're all the exact same work. They're all exactly the same work. And they are all these very tender and intimate and very hopeful moments. I've spent a lot of time in hospital rooms, taking care of people, or just not even taking care of, but attending to people in these very precious and intimate kinds of ways. And those are the spaces that feel most hopeful to me. And also like is sort of the thing underneath conflict work or hope or despair, or any of the things that we've sort of been talking about, or any of these even like really structural things too, any of the big societal sorts of pieces, like to me, there's something really generative about all of them and also really destructive about all of them. And I am most hopeful when I can actually attend to both, like the full extent of what's possible in any one of those spaces.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking that, like, what's at stake in all of those spaces is life.
Yes, exactly.
Life is what's at stake. And I think that the moments in each of our lives where life is at stake are the moments that like crack us open. They break us open. They fracture us. They make very clear what we are actually committed to because the stakes feel so high. And not in a negative way, like in a really generative way.
In like a really profound way, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that I have tried to stay close to the places where that's happening in my life and grapple with what that means for my witnessing practice.
It makes sense to me that those questions come up in these spaces of your partner's father and your dog at the end of her life. Like it makes, yeah, of course.
Death is most present, so life is most present.
Which is also true in birth work. Like it's exactly the same. Birth is more, or like life is most present there. So we are also at this like transition stage that we're like, you're at the veil.
Yeah, you're very close to death.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think it is hard to hold that while also holding the witnessing of war and of genocide and of mass shootings and of death at such a large scale. It feels impersonal, even though it, of course, is never impersonal.
They feel like the same thing to me.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah. I don't think I knew that until I said it out loud. But
Yeah, no, I want to hear about it because I see it as a sort of failure in myself that they feel different, but they do.
I don't think it is I don't think it's a failure in you. I think that's a failure of mass media. I think that's sort of a failure of the way, like it is very actively dehumanized. So I think it's like very engineered to be that way. So the death work that I did was I worked in maternal death prevention for a very long time, which is in some ways very impersonal. It's a lot of like reading files and reading, like piecing together case narratives and talking about it in these very like bureaucratic sorts of spaces. And the group that I did that with, we had a really intentional practice around like essentially demanding a grief process every time we did, or demanding attention to grief every single time we did it. And that profoundly transformed how we did any of that work. I mean, like we would, have a moment of silence. We were kind of always, anytime we'd sort of get too far from the idea that this was an actual person who had died, we had a lot of safeguards in place to return to that. And I think that practice of return is really sort of the only thing that we can do in a witnessing practice. It is so easy to dehumanize. It's so easy to seek out power in that, right? And it's like the kind of power that protects. It's the kind of power, or that feels like it protects. It's the kind of power that feels like it creates some kind of a distance. And I also think it is like, I'm not actually grieving every single person who's died in the last, 2 years or however many years of war. Like I can't, that's a scale that is impossible for me to actually hold as though they are my family members or people that are close to me. But I can have a practice around grief, a familiarity with grief, and a familiarity with death that I think is really important and that I think is really easy to turn away from. This is actually something else that I have sort of been exploring in some of my work, but also like how I show up is I've been disabled since I was little. I was like have had chronic pain since I was little, and then had a new chronic illness diagnosis a few years ago. And something that I think disabled people, chronically ill people with chronic pain sort of know pretty intimately is that we actually can't escape pain. Like there is an inevitability to experiencing pain that is part of living that life, or living in bodies that experience pain on a regular basis. And we all do a lot to try to numb out pain, or to try to get rid of it, or to try to avoid it. And like for those of us who are sort of confronted with this reality again and again and again, that we actually cannot outrun it, we cannot numb it sufficiently, we cannot get rid of it, there's sort of this acceptance that you like have to sort of surrender to it, of like, today is a day that I'm going to be in pain. Today is just a day where that is a part of that experience. And when we stop running away from it, when we start turning towards it, I think we get to choose what are the kinds of pain we want to experience, we can experience, what's the relationship that we want to have with that kind of pain. And I would much rather experience the pain of grief and loss and witnessing death than I would the pain of dehumanization, because to dehumanize somebody else is also going to dehumanize me, and that's not something that I am willing to do if and when I have a choice about it. And I'm sure there are times that I have made that as an imperfect thing too. But yeah, that's a choice for me of how they feel similar, I think. It's sort of this practice of holding a lot of different things as true at once, all in one go. And I think it's also the difference between like witnessing and feeling. Like you are not going to feel the same kind of grief over a dog that you've slept with for every single day for the last 16 years versus somebody across the world. But they're like a part and parcel of something related, I think. Or they can be if we let them be.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm realizing like I've started to categorize people I know, like split them into two categories: people who are willing to be with death and people who are avoiding death. And I have found that to be much more useful than many other sorts of like values-based or moral-based or judgment-based categories. Because I feel like what I've realized is like there are a lot of people who will tell me they're the same type of progressive, feminist, left-leaning, whatever that I am. And then we really get into working together or being together, and I'm like, I don't know about this. And then there are people who'll be like, I am so different than you. I don't agree with anything that you say or do, but we can be with death together. And I feel so much more kinship with those people than I do with the folks who maybe like assert or even practice a shared value system with me, but can't be with death. We can't meet there at that place where life is what's at stake. And if we can't look at death and be with death together, I can't hold it all with you.
I think that might be the answer to our original question of how do we hold it all? It's like, are you actually willing to hold it all? And all is really all. I think we talked about this in the last conversation we had about the definition of privilege. And privilege is just the choice whether or not to see something. And I think of that when you're talking about like the people who choose not to see death or who choose to run away from death. If you don't have to look at it, that is a privilege. If you have been in a situation where you have to look at it on any one of these tectonic scales that we've been talking about, whether it is literally the person next to you or a relative or it's somebody across the world, and you are not in a position where you can look away from it or you are even choosing to turn towards it. That to me is a responsible stewardship of power in a lot of ways if you're choosing to turn towards it. And I similarly have very changed relationships with people who cannot do that or who choose not to do that.
I really appreciate like that way of bringing privilege into this conversation as well, of like the choice to look at it, the choice to hold it all, because those are similar things. Like if you're not looking at it, you're not holding it. And I think I will also bring in here a lot of tenderness. I can also reflect on some of the relationships in my life where like not looking at death is very much like a trauma response to like early experiences with death. Like there are a lot of reasons. Privilege is not the only reason we might not look at it, which is not what you were saying, but
No, and it's the same. It's like, it's one of those things where it's like, I want to kind of always be nuanced about it. And I also want to be firm with it. And it's sort of a both and of like, how do we hold both at the same time? And I think we can hold both at the same time. And like, even for those of us who've experienced trauma of loss, running away from it or turning away from it is a healthy coping mechanism a lot of the time. And also it doesn't take it away. It doesn't get rid of it. It's still there and we've still experienced that. And there's still an element of holding it that we've kind of had to go through that I think it still stands in some ways.
yeah, some of us will choose to look at something and some of us will have to. Some of us will choose to hold it and some of us, it will be thrust into our hands. I think that's true of grief as well, right? Like your portal into this work could be losing a pet or a parent or a neighbor or a stranger that you are like happen to be with when something happens. Or it could be a witnessing practice, a commitment to not turning away, a commitment to like being present with it. There's these different orientations that can still share the same commitment. And this is also where privilege comes in as well, right? Because then, we can think about in some of the organizing work I've done where it's like who in the room speaks first, the person who has the lived experience. Like we can value the choice of looking at this perhaps somewhat differently than the forced reality of living it. And that we may all be holding it together, but we're holding it differently.
Completely. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I want to hold on to like the depth and I think like nuance and rigor that we're holding together. But I also want to bring something that I think is sort of sometimes more superficial into the conversation, which is just like work.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think has been hard to hold this year is just like, I have to keep working. Like, I just have to keep making podcasts for other people while all this is happening. I have to like, I grappled with like, am I going to launch a book in this world? Like, what does that look like? Like, I think especially as small business owners or self-employed people, our work can more often feel like a choice. And so we like can get really wrapped up in like, well, is it responsible to do that? Is it okay to do that? Can I sell this thing right now? Like, how are you holding work as a part of this equation? Like, what does that looked like or felt like for you this year?
That is a great question. I think my like truly honest answer is like not well.
Same.
Yeah, I think so I guess for context is I started off my self-employment work, 1 by accident, 2 as a DEI consultant, and 3 working with government contracts.
Woof. Those were hit this year for sure.
Yeah, really intensively. And the like short answer is that like I didn't do well with any of it. I think I like really hit many walls and I didn't know what to do and lost money and didn't know how to pivot fast enough and didn't quite like a lot of the experiments that I tried either were things that I gave up on really quickly because I felt really bad about them or I felt like I should not be asking for those kinds of questions at the moment. I had a lot of stories around the state of the world and what that meant for me to run a business, to earn money, to try to get work. And I also simultaneously, speaking of holding it all and all these multiple things of being true at once, found a lot more purpose and a lot more joy, honestly, and a lot more fulfillment in being like, I actually do work that makes a difference and that like does change something and shift something and is important. And there is some reason outside of a business reason that people should be engaging the work that I do, I think. And maybe that's really egotistical and maybe that's, like...
I mean, I think your work is incredibly important and I have learned a lot from it. So the impact is felt for sure.
I appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, like I have all the same stories that I think every business owner does of like, is this actually worthwhile to do? And I think I have found a lot of solace, honestly, in that I think it does. And that when I pour energy into my work and when I try to make that sustainable for both me and my clients and the people I work with in sort of the spaces that I'm in, that for me is like part of fulfilling my end of the bargain or my role in the social change ecosystem. Like that is sort of part of my like ethic of it. And that has made it a lot easier for me to step into the business owner role and to step into like, yes, I have to literally just go talk to 20 people about what I do and potentially pitch them on something. Like, yeah.
I mean, in a certain way, it's like heartening to hear that you grapple with these questions too, because your work to me feels like such a clear response to the polycrisis that I'm like, even you're not sure if you should be doing this and selling this right now. Like, I think my mindset is often to be a little more like, this feels so frivolous in a moment of like such gravity, or I can definitely fall into common traps of like devaluing creative work in hard times or things, even though I know that it's perhaps most important in these times. Those voices get loud when things are hard. Just to share my personal experience, I think that I've had sort of a few separate struggles this year, like you're naming. Like I've definitely tried things that just didn't work. I also have found that like I just have so much less energy and capacity to work. And sometimes I feel like I need to be working more. So I am supporting myself more financially, and I just don't have it in me. As a service provider, I have noticed with some of my clients that like they are trying to make up for their own lack of capacity by giving more work to other people and then pressuring those people, aka me, to perform at even higher levels. And I just can't anymore. Like, that's a dynamic I cannot do.
Yeah. Capitalism gets to all of us, right? And it sort of is in this really insidious ways. And that's like a glib thing to say, but it also is if we don't have capacity, we're supposed to outsource it to somebody else. If we don't have what we can do, we're supposed to find it and resource it. And we're supposed to squeeze everything out of it that we possibly can. And we're supposed to try to have control as much as possible, right? There's so much of it too is even just a response to when things feel out of control, we try to control the things that we can. And the things that we can require so much work to control, or so much more work to control, and we often can't do it. To bring it back to this like firefighting and gardening sort of thing, everybody that I'm working with is in more and more of a firefighter mode. I am more and more of a firefighter mode, and I have to really intensively ramp up how I'm taking care of myself to like be a gardener of my own self and my own body and my own business and my own sort of lived reality. And that means that I have less capacity. That's just true. And literally every single person I talk to is in exactly the same boat. And some people are more or less aware of how much more or less capacity they have and are more or less willing to blame themselves or blame other people for the kind of capacity that they have. And that is a hard place to be in. That is a hard place to be in.
I feel like we kind of talked about the firefighting strategy of like the house is on fire, got to put the fire out first, got to save the people, got to find the pets, and got to get out of the house. Like that's what we're doing. And something I notice in myself is if it feels like I need to be firefighting out in the world, then I'll just start firefighting in my business when actually my business is fine. Like the low open rate on my email is not a fire to fight, but it will feel like one sometimes if I'm in firefighting mode, and I will have this like huge I have noticed this year, just like my general nervous system responses can be pretty out of whack when I have a very low capacity and I'm tired, and things will feel big that are not big. Things will feel like fires that I don't think are fires.
And we're all sort of having this like compounded trauma response to everything all at once, right? There is absolutely like a black and white lack of discernment that we are biologically turned towards.
And that said, there's also gardening, as you've mentioned. And I know that for you, like you've located gardening in a lot of your equity work. You talked about having to firefight and garden at the same time. But I'm curious, like, where are you gardening right now? Or how are you bringing that in amidst the firefighting of this moment? Are you doing both? Does both feel impossible right now?
I'm like hesitant to say this out loud, but I think I am in some ways more turned towards gardening than I am towards firefighting. And I think that is sort of my questions of enoughness are like, am I firefighting enough? There are so many fires right now. Shouldn't I be putting out more of them? And I think just sort of where I started with this of like, if I can trust that other people are firefighting, can I be, is part of my role to hold on to the gardening. And I don't think it's a perfect yes or no. I don't think it's a perfect binary. I don't think it's even like a perfect, maybe it's just a season of life, right? Or season of this particular moment that is some way that I can show up, or something that I can hold on to, or some way that I can kind of root down. I'm doing a lot of gardening. I'm doing a lot of tending. I'm doing a lot of like any of the conflict work that I'm sort of trying to do for me is driven by what are the skills that we're going to need to practice to do this together better. Like if all of our nervous systems are fried, if everybody is in trauma response mode, if everybody is in this sort of black and white place where we cannot be discerning, how can I be really ruthless in holding on to my discernment so that somebody is holding on to discernment and so that somebody can be, hey, there's still a garden over here. I think a lot about Lauren Olamina carrying seeds in Octavia Butler's books of like, somebody's got to carry the seeds. Somebody's got to think to carry the seeds. And I am in no way, shape, or form trying to say that I am Lauren Olamina, but I am trying to say that some of us have to carry seeds and have to hold on to this practice of whatever can come next. Wow. And, you know, there's an argument to be made for that passing around or turning up the like firefighting dial or turning it down or whatever. But I think a lot of my work is gardening work.
I'm really trying to hold on to, if I want everyone to be able to have a beautiful life, then it has to be okay to have a beautiful life.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And I think that beauty is not just about pleasure and feel good and like fineness. Like to me, as a philosopher of aesthetics, like beauty is about sublimity. It's about those moments where life is at stake. Like that's where we rise to the occasion. And so to me, a beautiful life is not a life wrapped in your own privilege where you don't look at anything. It's a life where you do look at it and you're with it. And it's that same thing from before. It's like the life where we hold death together. And if I'm staying with that practice, like I have to let it be okay that I'm not doing what I see a firefighter doing. That's what I keep coming back to over and over again this year is like, cultivating joy, finding beauty does not mean looking away from death. And in fact, maybe it means holding it even closer.
Yeah.
And it's truly serving no one for me to be so hard on myself about feeling okay sometimes.
We're tending to what we can as we can. I think about that a lot. We are tending to what we can as we can. And sometimes that's gardening and sometimes that's firefighting. One of my oldest friends in the world a long, long time ago said something. We like had very similar family patterns where he was like, both of our grandparents like fled these very intensive colonial powers and like as refugees. And you and I are these two overeducated flower children just like living our best lives. And I think about that all the time.
Oh my gosh. Truly, like, this is how I feel every time I have dinner with my grandmother. And I'm like, why are we eating food all out of the microwave? And she's like, aren't microwaves a miracle? Because she grew up on a farm where they had to grow or slaughter everything they ate. Like, so much of this is perspective. It's understanding like the evolutionary nature of it. And grief work is death work, is ancestral work, is lineage work for all of us.
Yeah.
And all of that is work. And some of that is our business.
Right, exactly. I always have a hard time with this too, because my work has always been birth, sex, and death work. And I'm also like, and I have to run a business, and I have to like put food on my table,
Yes.
and I have to earn and provide for my family. Like there is an element of that too. Like those are all just realities that live together. Yeah. They're just all realities that live together.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And I think that the solace maybe I'm taking away from this conversation is just that like, I know I can do it because I've already been doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I made it through this year.
Mm-hmm.
I will hopefully make it through next year.
Yeah.
And things may look radically different. In fact, they will. Like part of what is happening, I think, this year for me, again, which I shared at the beginning, is like it's become very clear what matters and what doesn't. And my capacity to hold on to what doesn't matter is very low.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that stuff is just going away. It's falling away, or I'm cutting it out. And while it may feel like, or it just be true that I have less as a result, what I have left really matters.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to take into my personal life and my business next year. I am putting in place some pretty radical shifts that I'll share about in 2026, but like a lot is changing because I just can't keep doing the things that don't feel like they matter anymore.
Yeah. There's a lot of discernment that comes through that practice, I think. Yeah.
And you're our discernment gardener. So
I'm here for it. I'll add it to my bio.
oh my gosh. Well, Shivani, this has really been a life-giving conversation and a death-giving conversation, quite literally. Is there anything else that you want to share or say to listeners as we kind of close out this conversation and this year?
I think I have this simultaneous thing of like, it is really that deep, and sometimes it's not that deep. And that feels like a ridiculous thing to say after all of this conversation, but it is sort of the thing that's coming up for me is like, sometimes, yeah, it's about like the really low open rate on the flow desk, and like, we just got to do that. Sometimes that is a little bit of a fire, and sometimes the fire is the neighbors literally setting a fire somewhere down the street, and sometimes it is watching our tax dollars be literally used for genocide across the world. And like, it feels ridiculous to equate all of those fires. And I don't think we're trying to equate those fires. I think we're trying to say those can all be fires at different times and in different scales and in different ways. And we also have permission to garden what we have to garden and to put out the fires that we can and to walk between both as we can. And that even if there's no such thing as enough in any of it, like maybe that can also be enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hope that we can all get some rest as we near the winter solstice and these really quite literally dark days. And otherwise, I look forward to seeing everyone in the new year. The podcast will be back at some point in January. And, I guess until then, we will see you off the grid. Thanks for listening to Off the Grid. Don't forget to grab your free Leaving Social Media toolkit at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. This podcast is a Softer Sounds production. Our music is by Melissa Caitlin Carter of Making Audio Magic, and our logo is by Natelier Studio. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and until next time, I'll see you off the grid and on the interweb.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go